Much for joining us at the Prevention Research Center for Healthy Neighborhoods monthly seminar. Today, I am very excited to introduce Dr. Monica Webb Hooper, who will be presenting her work today, Digital Interventions in African American Tobacco Smokers, Culturally Specific Enhancements. For any of you who've heard our director, Dr. Lane Borowski, speak, or even myself, you know that the center has a big commitment to addressing tobacco use locally and applying the things that we're learning from our own collaborations here and more broadly to other areas who suffer from the same high rates of smoking use that we do here. So I'm excited to hear Monica's work in this area. So Dr. Webb Hooper is the Associate Director of Cancer Disparities Research and Director of the Office of Cancer Disparities Research at the Case Comprehensive Cancer Center at the university. She's also a professor of oncology, family medicine, and community health and psychological sciences. Dr. Webb Hooper is trained as a clinical health psychologist whose research interests are in chronic illness prevention and cancer risk behaviors with an emphasis on minority health and racial and ethnic disparities. And her work focuses on mind-body relationships and the psychological factors that influence health. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hooper. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Appreciate the kind introduction. And thank you for the invitation to come and present. So I'm excited to tell you about some of the work that our group has been working on over the past, I guess, year or two. Here's an outline of the things that I'll be describing today. We'll start with a brief background on tobacco-related disparities. We'll talk a bit about the Quitline as an approach to tobacco control and health equity issues related to the Quitline. And then we'll talk a bit about culturally specific interventions, what I mean by that, and how we develop them. And then I'll describe findings from a couple of trials, one that's still an ongoing trial and one that we've recently completed the pilot of, and we'll share the results with you. Okay, so I always think it's important to start with a definition of what we mean by health disparities. This is a term that is used a lot, and sometimes I think it's used appropriately, but sometimes I think we might want to tweak the definition a little bit. And so a definition of health disparities that has, I've kind of narrowed down the definition over time to just sort of the bottom line. When you think about health disparities, they are a type of health difference. But as I always say, that difference is not necessarily a bad thing. Differences can be appreciated, should be appreciated, can be really good. However, health disparities, when you add the term health onto the term disparity, which just means difference in and of itself, it then becomes something that needs to be modified, changed, reduced, eliminated. So it's a negative thing if it's a health disparity. And these are also differences that are modifiable. Some people talk about health disparities that are things that people really have no control over. Health disparities are modifiable. They don't have to exist in our society, but there's an undercurrent across all of the population groups that suffer from health disparities with this undercurrent of oppression, of systematic oppression, social injustice. And that these can be manifested in a number of ways, sort of broadly thinking about social conditions, economic conditions, behavioral factors, the influence of culture, healthcare, and at the policy level as well. And in tobacco cessation, the most persistent disparity is the one that you see illustrated here, where African American males and females are, there's robust relationship where African American males and females are less likely to quit smoking and especially to maintain it over time compared to their white male and female counterparts. And this is the case even though the rate of tobacco use is about the same between these two populations. Still, there is a greater difficulty with quitting smoking. So I've spent a lot of time trying to better understand why that might be, and it's important to address tobacco because it's related to a number of chronic conditions. So we're in the cancer center, so we think about it as it relates to cancer, but tobacco use is a problem across all. It's just really the most damaging thing that anyone can do for their health, and African Americans suffer disproportionately for these illnesses that are all tobacco related, and unfortunately, quite a few others. So I think for these reasons, in addition to the fact that this population, African Americans that is, tends to have less access and lower utilization of evidence-based treatments. And so it's important that we continue to focus on this population as a priority within tobacco control and health disparities in general. So then thinking about, well, what are innovative methods? What can we do? This disparity is long-standing. Most studies show it. I've conducted a couple of studies, however, where we've been able to eliminate the racial disparity in tobacco cessation, but we still need to think about what more we can do and how we can move forward, especially given the change in the landscape of tobacco use products and with the technology that is available. And technology is important because we think about, in one way, so as a psychologist, our bread and butter is face-to-face interventions. We're therapists. That's what we do. We bring people in, we have therapy. And people who are in the public health domain say, well, that's great, and it seems to work, but who wants to come to therapy? And many people wouldn't be interested in that, so you have low reach. So we need to think about other things we can do. So in my lab and in my program of research, what I thought about is, well, how can we translate what we know to be effective from face-to-face interventions into a format that can reach people at a mass level? And so some of the ways we think about increasing reach and reducing disparities in tobacco cessation and in other areas would be the telephone counseling, which is delivered by the Quitline on a national level, and then the internet, and then also mobile applications, which are really coming on board a lot as sort of population health approaches to think about this. So I'll start with the discussion of what tobacco quitlines are. They are a delivery channel that reaches more smokers than any other single channel, with reaching about 500,000 smokers per year. They're available in all 50 states, provinces, territories, District of Columbia, etc. You can reach your Quitline by calling a toll-free number. It's 1-800-QUIT-NOW, and based on your area code, it will route you to the Quitline in your state. So although, for example, my cell phone is still a Florida, if I call with my cell phone, I'm going to get the Florida Quitline. Then when they get my address, they'll realize I live in Ohio, and they'll route me to the appropriate Quitline. So this is a system that is publicly available. It's free. So it's great because it reduces the barriers to some of the barriers, like having to come somewhere, having to pay for the services. They follow a standard protocol, but of course they are tailored depending on who they're talking to and what stage they are in terms of thinking about quitting. They also will talk to you if you're a caregiver, or if you'd like to help a family member quit. They'll also provide services for you. So in theory, these are really important. This is a really important channel. In theory and empirically, I'd say that's true. They're important also for serving underserved populations who may be less interested in coming in for care or not have access to it. So I think about the Quitline then as an equity-based intervention system. It's designed to promote tobacco cessation for all. And the question is, does this work? Well, we know that it does demonstrate effectiveness, and across multiple trials have demonstrated this with the Quitline. So about, on their own, 7% of people who try to quit smoking in a given year are successful. So most are not successful when they just quit cold turkey, I'm going to put my cigarettes down and never come back to it. Some people can do that. We all probably know someone who has done that, but those people are relatively few and certainly far between. But on the average, the Quitline yields about a 30% effectiveness rate at 1 year. So this is actually quite good for counseling interventions over 1 year. And also we know that individuals who use the Quitline are significantly more likely to quit than people who try to quit using another approach or no approach at all. So this is an evidence-based method. But the question is, although we can think about this as an equity-based system, does it really benefit everyone equitably? So when you think about African Americans as a population with high motivation to quit, and that's been found in a number of studies, national studies, this is a population that really wants to quit smoking, but we know tend to be less successful, but are actually high utilizers of Quitlines. And actually when the CDC's Tips for Former Smokers campaigns run, African Americans tend to be the largest group of people, racial ethnic group of people, who are contacting the Quitline as a function of watching these commercials. This one analysis found that 14% of all Quitline callers are self-identify as being Black or African American, and so the reach ratio compared to other underserved groups is greater among African Americans. So then the Quitline then is an important mechanism for reaching this population. There have been few studies, however, really looking at racial ethnic differences in Quitline effectiveness. So I was able only to identify 4 studies who've done this. And 3 of those reported lower quit rates among African American Quitline enrollees compared to white non-Hispanics, and 1 found higher quit rates among African Americans. So the research is a little bit mixed here, but most of the analyses thus far demonstrate that this population, although everyone's calling this equity-based system, this is a population really interested in it, are still less successful with becoming smoke-free. So I think it's important that we understand what's happening within the Quitline with regard to how well it engages individuals, how well the services meet the needs of individuals, to think about how we might maybe improve what's being offered, delivered through the Quitline. So we conducted an analysis. This has 19,000 people in it, looking at Quitline data from 5 states. And we averaged all the states together, and we looked first at racial differences, white, non-Hispanic, and self-identified African Americans, to look at the calls completed. So Quitlines offer up to 4 counseling calls, and this may vary a little bit by state, but generally that's the case. And what you can see, so it looks like a relatively small effect, but it is clinically meaningful and statistically significant, where African Americans are complete fewer of the counseling calls. And this has actually been found in other studies in some of the other work looking at racial ethnic differences. And of the 4 calls, in general, you can see that overall, most people are completing, between 1 and 2 calls, so they're not getting the full dose of the intervention, which is the 4-call program. And then we also looked at interest in a web-only program. So, with the move towards how do we increase intervention reach? How do we reach many people? How do we use technology to do that? Most Quitlines now offer, in addition to telephone counseling, web-based services and a text messaging program as well. And so people have the option of enrolling in the Quitline through the web, so you don't have to call 1-800-QUIT-NOW. You can actually enroll in Quitline Services through the web, and you can call 1-800-QUIT-NOW. And even if you call in, you can opt for a web-based program only, web coaching, versus having phone calls if you don't really wish to have counseling. So what we looked at is a sample of, so these are people who chose the web-only program. And these are all the major racial ethnic groups in the United States. And what you can see is that African Americans, even among people who choose the Quitline, are still least likely to choose that program, enroll in it, and utilize the services of it. So this is enrollment, less likely to choose that as an option. So for me, that's a signal that maybe this population is less interested in a service that is web delivered. Then when you look at, as a measure of engagement, well, how likely are individuals who choose the web program to actually log in and begin to utilize the services? If you don't log in, then you don't have any exposure to the web coach program. And what you can see here is that African Americans are significantly less likely to log in, even among those who are choosing it. And this is what we might refer to as digital inequities. Then the question becomes, well, what can we do about this? Is there some way, since the Quitline is important for reaching the population, and this is the population very interested in that, is there anything that we can do? So my work has focused a lot on the development of culturally specific interventions and questioning whether this is important. To develop a culturally specific intervention takes a lot more investment and time than a sort of standard intervention that you can apply to everyone. So the question has always been, does this matter? Does this confer an additional benefit over and beyond what you would find from a generic or one-size-fits-all kind of evidence-based approach? When you think about the landscape of health behavior change interventions, whether you're talking about exercise, nutrition, diabetes management, any of the things that we think about, there are sort of 3 kinds of interventions broadly. The first is standard, so these are interventions that are designed for the entire population of people who want to quit smoking or people who'd like to lose weight. And then a little bit more specific are targeted interventions. These are interventions designed for specific subgroups of the population. So we're going to target adolescents who need to quit smoking. We will target pregnant women, veterans, racial ethnic minority populations, people who speak certain languages. So these targeted interventions are more specific because they address the needs of that specific population. And then everyone within that group, let's say we're targeting women, all women would get the same intervention. And then the tailored interventions are those that are designed at the individual level. So everyone in the room would get a different intervention based on your responses to a baseline assessment, and then we tailor the intervention for you. We may modify that depending on your response as we go through. And then when it comes to this idea of cultural specificity, the term that I use for these interventions are culturally specific interventions, which is a form of group level targeting. In the literature, you'll see it described in a number of ways. And that's one of the concerns actually about this area of research, is that there's sort of lack of consistency with even our terminology, and certainly a lack of consistency with how these interventions are developed. So you might see them referred to as culturally sensitive, culturally competent. The reason I use the term culturally specific is because these are interventions that are designed for a specific, usually it's an ethno-racial population, but it could be some other sub-demographic, but it's with a recognition that it may not apply to all members of that group because of the significant within-group heterogeneity that exists. So this gives you an example. So one of the major approaches that sort of guides my research in my area, my way of delivering therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what we use in clinical psychology as our primary evidence-based intervention to treat a number of things like major depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, PTSD, you name it. This is kind of what we usually use to treat. And so just to give you an example of what makes an intervention culturally specific, in this case for African Americans, in the CBT column, you'll see what we talk about in our CBT intervention. These are group level interventions, but they can be delivered individually as well. And so you can see the kinds of things that we talk about. And then in our culturally specific intervention group, we talk about the same topics, but the framing of the information, the framing of the content, the framing of the conversation is different. And it is developed based on empirical evidence about populations, and we draw from not only sort of statistics, which that we include like epidemiological literature, but we look at anthropology, sociology, we look at other things to kind of understand cultural groups. And then it also is beneficial if you're working with people who have an emic perspective of the group, sort of an insider's knowledge about the concerns, challenges, worldviews of groups. And then we also get information from the groups themselves. So we conduct formative work where we bring people in who are within the group that we are trying to target and find out from them if this intervention is responsive to their needs or not. So just to give you an example, when we talk about in the first overview session at orientation, we always talk about informed consent and research and participating in research. How do people feel about that? But we know from the literature and from lots of experience that African Americans have many times a reasonable distrust for research and exactly what's going to be happening here. So we're very explicit in our orientation session when we're talking with African Americans about that history and about why they would be safe in our study, what are the protections that they have, and we allow them to voice any concerns they have. In our traditional intervention, we talk about informed consent, but we don't really delve into it to that degree. Another example is at session 3, we talk about stress management. We talk about stress management with everyone. We teach everyone stress management skills as a part of CBT, but when we're doing so in our culturally specific intervention, we're talking also about stressors that are unique to African Americans. These are things that we know are important, and many of which relate to tobacco use, such as racism and discrimination. In a typical one-size-fits-all tobacco cessation intervention, we are not touching the topic of racism and discrimination. But we talk about that explicitly when we're talking with this population. Okay, so the question is, does this work? So these are the results from the trial that I just mentioned where we compared the two groups. And what you can see is that in this example, yes, our culturally specific intervention, both at the end of therapy and throughout our 12-month follow-ups, conferred a differential advantage or benefit for 7-day point prevalence abstinence, which is our measure of tobacco use here, where we had better effects for the people who received our culturally specific intervention. That's not to say that the standard intervention was ineffective. It was actually highly effective. To have quit rates at over 60% at the end of therapy and maintain that to just under 30% over time it matches or exceeds most intervention trials. So we could say then that, and I think the conclusion that we offer in this study was when it's possible or if resources permit one to develop a culturally specific intervention for tobacco use in this population, that is our recommendation. When it's not possible, then the standard version is also effective. And in a trial before this one, we did find that that this CBT, the generic one, did generalize to this population, and then we took that a step further in this trial to see if there was a differential advantage of the culturally specific intervention. But of course, who wants to come to group interventions? Those are very select individuals. We have issues with show rate, all those kinds of things. So what can we do to make sure that this falls into the hands of more people? So what we did was we translated our effective cognitive behavioral therapy-based culturally specific intervention into a video format. And we thought if we develop a video format of this intervention so that people will receive much of the same information that they would receive if they were to come in to our sessions in a format that can reach many people, and that is flexible, because if we develop a video, we can deliver that video in a number of ways. Maybe we can also have an impact at the population level. So we developed a video-based intervention that's called Pathways to Freedom, Leading the Way to a Smoke-Free Community. It combined our cognitive behavioral therapy intervention along with the original Pathways to Freedom, which is a set of written materials developed for African Americans. It's the most established set of written materials, but it's a bit dated, so we updated a lot of things, but we used sort of the structure of what Pathways to Freedom included. And here is a description of the 7 sections of the video intervention. So the first way in which we delivered this was through a DVD format, recognizing that maybe people could watch a DVD on their computer or if they have a DVD player. And so we knew that this was one way we could deliver it, but we could deliver it in a number of ways. But if you were watching it as a DVD, here are the sections that you would see. You would be able to choose which, there's a menu and you could select what you'd like to watch. But we infused all the things from our, to the extent that we can, in a 60-minute video intervention where you're sort of distilling down 8 sessions worth of content. But we infused as much as we could from our face-to-face intervention into our video format. And we did find that it was effective. I'm not going to go over those results, but we did find that the video approach was effective. So the next question became, well, now we're moving, DVDs are kind of old, who's watching DVDs? We have to move this forward with technology. So the next question became, well, everybody's digitizing interventions, but we don't want to widen disparities. So we'd like to make sure that all groups have access to them. But the question that I went back to initially was, but is there a digital divide happening here? These are data from Pew, which is where most researchers will find information, and anyone could look at the Pew findings on the use of the internet in this country and other mobile type applications. And so the most recent Pew report suggested that 84% of American adults use the internet, which is I'm sure increasing over time. But when I looked at the assessment question that is used to derive this number, I actually found that I thought it wasn't the best assessment question. The question was, and as of 2013 through the present, the question is, people who say yes are included in this 84%. Do you use the internet or email at least occasionally? Do you access the internet on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile handheld device at least occasionally? So when I saw that, I thought, that's not a great question. Most people would say yes to that. But does that mean that they are active internet users or that they would benefit from a health-related intervention delivered in this format? So I still have some concerns about that. And then even looking at the Pew Research data, they do suggest that individuals who are lower income Americans still lag behind in the adoption of all these technologies. And when you look at the numbers of sort of all of the above, people who have access, we still have pretty significant differences when you look at people whose annual income is less than $30,000 per year. And then in the work that I do, which largely includes across racial ethnic groups, mostly lower income individuals, a number of them still are not using the internet the way we may be using the internet. And they don't have data plans the way we have data plans. But when you talk to researchers, they're just like, yeah, of course, everybody's using it. So these are concerns that I've had. So we conducted an analysis with just a quick survey of individuals who are coming in for tobacco cessation counseling to kind of understand from them, well, what would you benefit from? What intervention format do you think would be most effective or you'd be interested in participating? And here's what we found. So people could check all that apply here. But when you look at these two, and this is kind of where I'm going next. So we looked at, and these were mostly African Americans, of course, but not all. So when we looked at internet programs, few people were really interested in an internet program about quitting smoking. And it was sort of mixed. People kind of were interested in the text messaging program about quitting smoking. When you look at mobile applications also, and these data were collected in 2016, so perhaps it would change a little bit now, but relative at the time, more people were not very interested in a mobile application. So then we thought, well, we'd like to utilize the Quitline, perhaps enhance the services. We know this population, African Americans, less likely to quit, but they use the Quitline. What can we do? How can we infuse technology? How can we use the interventions that we have, that we know are effective in this group, and perhaps maybe make some change at the Quitline level? So we are currently conducting a semi-pragmatic randomized controlled trial called ProjectFREE. It's a 5-year study. We're right at the 2.5-year mark of the study. And what we'll be talking about here is and this is the overall goal, is to look at the incremental effectiveness of adding a culturally specific adjunct to the services delivered by the Quitline. And the hypothesis for what we'll be talking about today, because of course we don't have the final outcomes, is we're looking at engagement. Can we increase? We know individuals are less likely to utilize the services, less likely to call in. So can we enhance the engagement with the Quitline by adding an evidence-based intervention that is culturally specific to African Americans and compare that to control conditions so that we can actually make some causal conclusions? So our participants are individuals who live in the state of North Carolina, and these are the criteria. So they all self-identify at the time of enrollment as being African American or Black. They're all smokers. They're all eligible for the state services. They have access, critically, to something that they can watch a video, either a DVD player or they have access to the internet, and they also have to have contact information so that we can follow up with them. Here's a design of the study. So as of this analysis, we had 641 people. Our ultimate goal is 1,050 people, and to date we're at 850 people, something like that. But here's what happens. So they enroll in the Quitline. When they self-identify as African American, then they're asked about if they'd like to be screened for a study. And if they're interested in doing that, if they're screened and they're eligible and they provide verbal consent, then they are enrolled in the study. We then randomize them to one of three conditions. So the first condition is the real-world condition. So these are people who just received the standard Quitline care as delivered. They'll complete our assessments, but nothing changes about their Quitline service. In the standard Quitline Services plus cessation standard video condition, this is our attention match control. We wanted to make sure that if we're delivering an intervention, that it's not just because maybe these individuals got a video and maybe had nothing to do with the culturally specific part, but just they got an extra intervention. So to control for that, we are delivering a standard intervention that's designed for anyone who wishes to quit smoking. And then the final condition, and this is the one that we're most interested in, is our Pathways to Freedom condition. So these individuals will receive the standard Quitline care, but they will also have access both in a DVD and online to our Pathways to Freedom intervention. And then we follow them through 6 months. Critically, in this study, we have to make sure that we're assessing the extent to which people are watching the video. If they don't watch it, then we don't know if it has any effect or not. And so that's important. So we're delivering it via a DVD. So when they enroll, we mail it out here to them. They also can watch it on a private YouTube channel. So we created private YouTube channels for the 2 video conditions, and only participants have access to that, so they can watch it there. And then we also have the quit coaches. So when they call in to quit for their counseling, or when the quit coaches proactively call them for counseling, if the quit coaches can see ProjectFREE participants and what group they're in. So if they're in one of the 2 video conditions, they talk to them about, hey, make sure you watch your DVD. Based on what they're talking about, you should be watching section 6 because it talks about stress or whatever it is. So they are doing that. And then we also send them by, actually that's about my month. We send them twice a month. We send them a text message reminder with a link to parts of the video to say, thanks for being in the study. We send them some kind of little motivational factoid, and then a link to encourage them to watch the intervention. So what we're talking about today in terms of outcomes are what we are assessing at 3 months post-enrollment. So we're looking so far at how satisfied they are with their coaching. So that's just what the Quitline provides. How satisfied are you with that? Are you using the text messaging? So we send them text messages. Are you using that to access the interventions? We're also assessing satisfaction within the 2 video condition groups. How satisfied are you with these interventions that you are receiving? And then we're also looking at video views. So on YouTube, we can look at metadata. So we can look at views of each intervention overall and by the different segments, and I'll show you that. So the Quitline Services is essentially what it looks like. At call 1, they get the initial intervention, and then they have up to 4 calls. The last call usually happens about 3 weeks post their 3rd call. They are delivering evidence-based counseling following their standard protocols. They also receive nicotine patches or gum based on the benefit that they have. They also have the options for text messaging and web-based programs, as I mentioned. So our standard control group is a video called How to Quit. It was developed by the American Medical Association. Other studies have included it. It's a little dated, but most of the information I'd say is current in terms of the behavioral strategies and the psychological components and about addiction, I think are very relevant. And these are the kinds of sections that it includes. It's delivered by a narrator, an older doctor, white gentleman, very engaging. It's got, various people who appear in it. I think it's a reasonably good intervention, and thus far people have said that they like it. But here's what we found so far. So It appears that our randomization to conditions is successful thus far. We don't have any significant differences in the characteristics of our participants based on what group they're in. They are mostly women, and that's consistent with what we found when we analyzed data from 5 states. It's mostly, actually what we found, interestingly enough, is that black women are most likely across all racial groups of women to call the Quitline, and African American men are across all groups of men the least likely to call. So this kind of works with what we find here. Most of our participants report that they are mostly single, mostly have at least 12 years of education, middle-aged, and mostly lower income, which is what you might imagine from the Quitline. So we look at coaching call satisfaction. So this is just the service that the Quitline is providing. We don't find any significant differences thus far across our 3 conditions. So people are pretty satisfied with their Quitline coaching, which is a good thing from the Quitline perspective. When we look at satisfaction in just the 2 video conditions, though, we see a significant difference indicating greater satisfaction with our Pathways to Freedom video compared to the other. And we have a scale that we use, and we're asking about different aspects of the intervention and to kind of understand which is preferred. And it seems like it's Pathways to Freedom. The text messages that we send them every other week, we also ask them if they're reading those as a measure of engagement. There's no difference there, suggesting that people are reading them, and that's important because we don't want there to be differences in these kinds of things across the group. But thus far, people are saying, yes, when I get the message, I'm generally reading them. In the video conditions, they have a link that they can click on to watch either parts of How to Quit or parts of Pathways to Freedom. So we ask them, are they clicking on the links within the messages? And we have a significant difference where people are saying that they're more likely to click on the Pathways to Freedom link. And I have some thoughts about why that might be. Perhaps we can discuss. Coaching call completion is important because we know from the data that we have from the Quitline overall, it was about 1.5 calls completed, maybe 1.6 calls completed. And what you can see here is that it's significantly more than that. So, but you also then have a significant difference in favor of Pathways to Freedom, where people are more likely to complete the coaching call. So they're satisfied with them, apparently pretty equitably, but people are more likely to complete them if they're in the Pathways to Freedom condition. And then we ask our measures of engagement. Did you watch the DVD that we sent you? So people are watching DVDs. At least they tell us they're watching DVDs. Right. They're watching, I don't know, on their computers. Maybe they have a DVD player. Sometimes when we listen to calls, people say, I don't have a DVD player. But people are saying that they're watching them. And then also we can see here that people are more likely to watch the Pathways to Freedom, whether they're watching it in a DVD form or if they're watching it online. And also another thing to note is that although a lot of people are saying they're watching the video via DVD, fewer people are saying they're watching online. So it again goes back to this issue of, are people interested and willing to engage with online interventions? And this is just watching a video. You don't have to, really do anything. And then we ask how many times did they watch the DVD and how many times did they watch it online. And you see the same pattern in favor of Pathways to Freedom, where people are more likely to watch it and more likely to watch it more than once. So here's what the websites look like. This is the standard intervention. So this is How to Quit. And you can see they can watch the entire video, or they can watch segments that we've kind of segmented out. They're both an hour long. And then so you kind of see, that's the guy who narrates it. Usually, sometimes he's wearing a white coat, but sometimes he's not. And then, they talk about nutrition, nicotine, addiction, all those kinds of things. And this is Pathways to Freedom. So it's a very different look and feel. It's just a very different intervention for what they're talking about. But we can see, so we can look at how many views there are overall, and then how it's looking for views for each of the segments. And what we find so far is really, I find it kind of astounding, that we have a 104% increase in website views and engagement is our indicator of engagement in the Pathways to Freedom, for the Pathways to Freedom site. So you see overall there's a dramatic difference in how many people are watching this, and we see the same pattern if you look at these sections. So it's not just overall video. Along the way you see the same thing. The numbers may differ a little bit, but you see that people are much more likely to be watching Pathways to Freedom. So to summarize this study, what we know is that Quitlines are important. African Americans are using the Quitline. In our study, we didn't find differences in the satisfaction in Quitline coaching services, but we do see promising effects of our culturally specific intervention based on our measures of treatment engagement. So in the future, we will be looking at, in this study, the role of Pathways to Freedom on smoking abstinence, because that's the ultimate question. Engagement is important because you have greater intervention exposure, but of course we want to understand, does this lead people to quit more? That's the ultimate question that we'll seek to answer. And then the other thing is, now our colleagues are talking about at the Quitline, would we be interested in developing culturally specific coaching? And I said, well, I think that'd be fantastic. Only one state currently does that, and that's with Hangzhou in California has a Quitline, and it's targeting Asian smokers. So they speak different languages, but they're targeting Asian smokers. But there are no other, actually that's not true. Texas did have a Spanish language Quitline. I don't know if it's still running in Spanish or not. So that's the internet. I want to tell you quickly then about one other project that we've been working on, and it's a pilot study where we're thinking about, again, how can we translate our intervention into forms that people can read. So the internet's one way, but maybe African Americans are maybe less likely to engage with an internet-based intervention. Well, what about mobile health? Everyone thinks everybody has a phone and everybody's using their phone, so maybe that's the better way to reach people. And can we translate this into a form that would be utilized as a mobile health intervention? And these interventions are widespread. I mean, we can all, look at your phone and download apps for anything you want, and anything you want to change, or anything you want to improve on. So these interventions are widespread. Most of them, however, are not evidence-based. And when you look at the tobacco cessation mobile applications online, most of them are not evidence-based, because anyone can create a mobile application. But it's a simple technology overall, and we decided to kind of approach this from a text messaging approach because of our data that said people were not as likely in a mobile application, but they were more amenable to a text message intervention. And they've been developed. Text messaging interventions are developed for tobacco cessation and have demonstrated efficacy. But of course, not everyone has a smartphone or a data plan. So hopefully text messaging can help us get around that a bit. This is the NCI, the National Cancer Institute. They have a website, a suite of mobile services for tobacco cessation at this website, smokefree.gov. Not only can you get access to their text messaging program, but they have mobile applications for things. They have targeted interventions for vets and for pregnant women and for adolescents, etc. But Smoke Free Text is sort of their general text messaging program. So this is just a description of how it works. It's a 6 to 8 week program. It sends out text messages to people. They can enroll online or by texting the word quit to this short code. They get text messages over time. Questions are assessed, like how are you doing? How's your mood? Have you quit smoking? And they use a message library that has behavior change, clearly theory-based, evidence-based techniques in their text messages. And then people can pull text messages as they want using one of 3 keywords. So what we notice in the literature is that there aren't any mobile health interventions that are culturally specific at all, and none within tobacco use as well. And we know that these interventions are preferred, not only for tobacco, but when you look at the preference for culturally specific interventions across domains of health, they tend to be preferred. And so we wondered whether we might be able to address some of the distinct characteristics of this population, increase engagement, and increase abstinence if we develop something that is a culturally specific mobile program. So the goals of this pilot study were to do just that. We wanted to translate our Pathways to Freedom intervention into a mobile health format, and we're using a video text format because our intervention is video-based, so it's not like a standard just reading words, which we also thought was important for literacy, imagery, and other factors. And then we wanted to conduct a 2-arm semi-pragmatic randomized trial among current tobacco users. So here's what we did. We translated the intervention, we pre-tested it first, and then we finalized the protocol, the prototype, and then we recruited smokers from the community. And we randomly assigned them to receive either our new mobile program, which is Path to Quit, or Smoke Free Text. All these individuals received one session of behavioral support. They all received nicotine replacement therapy as a starter kit of that. And then we followed them in this pilot study for just 6 weeks because we wanted to understand initially if we were going in the right direction. So our outcomes for the study, we looked at the things that you look at in a pilot study. Is it acceptable? Is it feasible to enroll people in this? How engaged are they? And then we also, of course, wanted to look at outcomes of cessation. In a pilot study, we viewed those as secondary outcomes, but they're really important to understand, is this helping with people's goal of becoming tobacco-free? And here are the criteria. So everyone self-identified as African-American smokers, even just 1 cigarette per day. They're all low income by federal standards. They all indicated, and this is consistent with what's required to enroll in Smoke Free Text, that you are motivated, that you're interested in quitting within the next 14 days. We excluded people in this study who didn't have a mobile phone and didn't have internet access. And I presented this at a conference a couple weeks ago, and someone said, why did you do that? And I said, well, because don't you guys say everybody has it? So let's find out if that's true. What happens in the real world if we exclude people who don't have it? So our participants then, we recruited 119 people with the help of my fabulous team, and Miss Burns over there worked hard for us, so we thank her for her work. But what we can see is between the two conditions, our randomization was successful. Our sample was pretty balanced in terms of males and females, mostly single, mostly at least completed high school, mostly lower income. That was a criteria. So at least, but not only low income, most under $10,000 per year. Smoked average about 10, a little bit more than that, cigarettes per day. So that's typical in this population. Not super heavy. African Americans are not super heavy smokers. Most had smoked for a long time, and the final is the FTND score. That's a measure of nicotine dependence, and it indicates relatively low nicotine dependence, although this measure is now outdated and I think we shouldn't be using it, but that's our measure for now. So when we developed the mHealth version of the intervention, Path to Quit, what we wanted to do was combine, so these are some of the constructs that are included and infused in our culturally specific intervention. We combined that with things about a mobile health intervention. It's convenient. The barriers are not there in theory. People can see, in this case, video imagery. It can be personalized. They can access it 24/7, unlike, face-to-face intervention. And we hope that, and we have these measures, but I'm not going to be reporting them today. We're looking at things also that might help us understand who is successful with this and who's not. So Pathways to Freedom was chunked then into different video clips, kind of like what you saw in the website, but even more kind of succinct. And then we pushed out the videos at prescribed times. We have a section that we call inquiry. So we realize that not everyone's going to, we can't deliver everything. So we send out messages that say, would you be interested in hearing more about this topic? And if they respond yes, then they receive a video. We develop keywords that are also culturally specific and generated from our pilot. So Jones is one. That's a term that people use. It means, are you craving a cigarette, as compared to, for example, smoke-free text, which just says crave. So we try to really think through as much as we could. Here's what it looks like. So when you sign up on the service, you sign up for a time where you will receive your first message based on whatever time you select. And then they're registered. They get 2 text messages right away. Thank you for, welcome to Path to Quit. Here are the keywords. We'd like you to use them as often as you would like. And then they get these components that I sort of just described. We also are pushing out assessment items so that we can assess in more real time their smoking status. Have you smoked in the past 24 hours? And that's better because it reduces some of the recall bias that happens when we see them typically. So here's what we found. I think we checked off all the goals in terms of feasibility. Our team went out and they recruited 119 people in 8 weeks' time. Went out, got the job done. Thank you, Ms. Burns. And then of those people who were eligible, and we recruited them, 80% of, 119 were recruited, 134 were screened, and then we retained almost everybody at our 6-week follow-up period. So that was good. And then we look at our primary outcomes, which are acceptability and engagement indicators. We have a scale that we use to assess how well they like the intervention. It's a modified version of the one we use in our ProjectFREE study. And there's no differences in intervention rating. So people like both of these. They like smoke-free text just as much as they like Path to Quit. And in terms of engagement, we asked them, do you think you remembered what you saw, what you read? And we have a benefit there. People say they're more likely to remember what's in Path to Quit. And then we looked at how well they used the program and how much they said that they used it. And we also had a significant benefit of Path to Quit. And then we wanted more of an objective measure of engagement because people, it's a randomized trial, so in theory, but still, just for social desirability purposes, we did get a measure of responding to assessment. So with the NCI's program, we were able to look at how often they responded to the assessments, which gives us some indication that they are reading the text messages at least. And we found, and then with our assessments that are built into Path to Quit, we found a significant benefit of Path to Quit in terms of getting people to actually respond to the questions that we are asking. And then our cessation-related outcomes. So this was a secondary outcome. Most everybody made a quit attempt, which makes sense. They had to be motivated. They know they're in a study. They were excited about trying this new program. And then we looked at self-reported cessation in the past 4 weeks. We did find a significant difference, even with such a small sample, with sort of tripling the effect of people who said that they quit for the past 4 weeks when we assessed them at our 6-week follow-up time point. And then we biochemically verified abstinence, so we used carbon monoxide ratings when they came back in at their 6-month assessment. And we also have a benefit, although it may have just missed statistical significance, of our Path to Quit program. And I was actually struck by the fact that the quit rates are as high as they are overall for a program that was so short. Obviously, there will be relapse as we go on. We stop at 6 weeks. We have to kind of follow them for longer. So a couple of things I thought it was interesting that we learned about the study, and I think about this in context and in contrast to what I usually hear from my colleagues about, technology-based interventions. So we did have a few feasibility challenges. We found that about 15% of people, they did have a phone that they could text message on, but they weren't using it. And our research assistants actually had to help them call their carrier to sort of turn on the text messaging function. So it wasn't everybody, but a few people that happened to. And I didn't really know that would happen. And then also we found that almost half of participants needed assistance with texting the short code. So when we had them in person and we said, okay, this is how you sign up, most people had never used the short code and didn't know how to do that. So we had to help them. And then most people were unfamiliar with using keywords to pull messages, and we had to really explain how that works. So if we weren't face-to-face with them to do that, they wouldn't have had a real understanding of how. And that's what we mean by digital inequity. So even if you have access, do you understand how to use these programs? And then mobile phone access. 98% of our participants had an Android phone, so not iPhones, and 80% had no contract phones. So these are not stable data plan phones. And when we try to reach people, the main reason we couldn't reach them is because their phones were off at that point. Fortunately, because we had some personal connections, we could find some of them who we couldn't find on their phone, but still, that was a concern. And then of the people who were ineligible for the study, which was about 70% of them, the main reason why was because they did not have stable internet access. So just to conclude with this study, I think Path to Quit is a promising intervention. It is yielding clinically meaningful effect sizes thus far, but both interventions, again, both of our standard and our culturally specific, people are liking them. We are finding a differential benefit for engagement with regard to Path to Quit. It's a short-term follow-up, so we need to, we're seeking additional funding to be able to carry out this work. But I think it's important because I think these approaches are addressing the needs of the community, and they are clearly scalable to address the issue of, well, who's really going to come into your face-to-face interventions, but we must carry it further. So I'd like to acknowledge our Path to Quit team, who worked really hard to help us recruit for that. And then, of course, acknowledge our team for Path to Quit and all the participants here locally. That was a local sample here who participated in the Path to Quit study. And, I think we have a lot to do. We're working with our engineering colleagues to further develop this intervention. We've now added a wearable sensor to the intervention so that people can receive messages if they appear to be smoking. And that's an area that is currently we're testing, but we have good qualitative feedback from our participants who say that they would wear it. And of those that we've tested the sensor so far, it seems to be able, with about 98% accuracy, to help us distinguish who's smoking a cigarette versus who's on the phone, eating, drinking, or other hand gesture behavior. So that's another place that we hope to take this work. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question about the states. You had 5 states that were part of the study. How did you identify the 5 states?
So our Quitline partner, Optum, operates 50% of the state's Quitlines. So they are able to reach out to their partners and say, we're looking for which states would be interested in working with the researcher. And those who agree, that's who we work with. Some states have different infrastructure, like North Carolina is a great state. They're really interested in research, so is Louisiana. There are certain states that really are invested. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know that you were saying that the way that individuals got the pathways to freedom is if they identified, they were African American, Black, then they were. Why couldn't that be done on the Quitline? Just even if I'm in Ohio and maybe North Carolina or South Carolina is providing that, why can't that be the trigger so then I get a North Carolina call person? Do you know?
Say that one more time.
So for instance, you said 5 states were participating.
In the data that I presented initially, in our ProjectFREE study, it's just North Carolina.
Okay, so if only North Carolina is, then why couldn't, if I'm in Ohio,
right,
why couldn't I access a Quitline person in North Carolina just by virtue of the fact of my culture? of how I'm identifying. So if I
That's just not the
identify
way,
that,
each state operates their own Quitline, and the services differ, and that's just the way Quitlines are set up, that you are enrolled in the Quitline in the state in which you live. But the goal is, I think the larger, broader goal is that if this is successful and we're able to replicate this and expand it, that my goal would be to have it available in all the Quitlines.
or you could just have a regional, you know, you could have one call center that people would be directed to based on if they were really could benefit from a culturally specific Quitline.
I don't know that would ever happen, because again, some Quitlines are run by different companies. Like Ohio is not one of the Quitlines that Optum runs. They run 28% of the Quitlines, and then even within that, the Quitlines get to decide what they offer, what they do. They have different benefits based on insurances. It's kind of complicated, and I've learned so much more about it that And the other thing I will say is that, and this is one of the hesitations I always have, even with my own research. So I have to say, and I should have said this earlier, that because there is so much within group heterogeneity, not all African Americans benefit from a culturally specific interventions or even want one. And we found that as well. Some people, unfortunately, we sometimes assume that if it's developed for us, it may not be of high quality. And other things that sort of make someone say, I don't want that, just give me what you give everybody else. So there's that to contend with as well. So it always has to be an option. Would you like to try this one? Would you like to try that one? And let people choose it. We wouldn't just say, oh, you're Hispanic, you get that one. Yeah.
So you mentioned the heterogeneity within the African American community. What do you think, or how feasible or how beneficial do you think a culturally specific intervention for subpopulations of African Americans, say Geechee colored people of South Carolina or Louisiana Creole?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So the cultural values that we infuse, for example, in this intervention are thought based on research and, frankly, my own experience to be applicable to a wide range of African Americans. But we also we also assess variables like level of acculturation is probably the most common one that we assess to understand who really benefits from these interventions and what are the differences in the cultural values within the group. So that population that you're mentioning is a special population. We first have to understand that population. So we have to understand what is the prevalence of tobacco use, how is it utilized, where are they with regard to intervention approaches and styles. It may be that this intervention is effective, it may not be, but we would have to really understand that population before we just march in like, bam, we have it. Yeah.
I know really focused on cultural specific programming and thinking about delivery. So like when we look at all these other health disparities, whether we're talking about mental health or other health concerns, we're looking at the people who are delivering these services, whether it is physicians or mental health professionals. So are you thinking maybe in the future to really study if that counselor is African American and I'm serving an African American community, whether I'm giving them a cultural specific program or whether I'm giving them the standard program? Do you think that it may be any different simply because I'm relating to you as being a part of this group?
Great question. So in the literature on psychotherapy in general, what we find consistently is that individuals prefer a race-matched therapist in general. However, the outcomes of therapy don't differ based on that concordance, but people will say they prefer it. In our culturally specific face-to-face interventions, there always is race matching as part of the cultural specific part of it. The question became, and we talked about this recently in one of our ProjectFREE meetings when they were thinking about, well, could we maybe have culturally specific counseling? And I said, well, I think that'd be great, but that means training counselors who are largely not African American Quitline counselors to be able to deliver this. Do I think that they can deliver it? Absolutely. I think that they have to be comfortable with it. I mean, even when I think about ProjectFREE, it was kind of funny, to me at least, that when we have a measure of acculturation in that we're assessing, and the baseline assessment happens at the Quitline. So it's the Quitline staff that are asking these questions. And some of the questions ask about race and racism. And so they kind of came back to me initially, the Quitline coaches, and said, well, our Quitline counselors aren't really comfortable asking these questions. It was like, so what? They need to ask them. It's about their delivery of it. If they're timid and shy and they don't want to talk about it, then that's going to make the participant like, wait, what's going on here? If they just deliver it with a confidence, it'll be fine. And what we found is no problems. We've had no problems with people, who are not clear, on the phone. They may not seem like they're race matched. They don't really know who they're talking to, but based on voices is all they can go by. But we haven't had a problem with that. And the other thing I'll say is that even in my programs that are not based, for example, we have another study called the End Nicotine Dependence Clinic, which is just whoever adult smokers in Greater Cleveland who want to come quit smoking. So there's no racial component to it. And our counselors are all diverse, but largely African American participants. There's no problem. We have high effectiveness rates. It's just about getting the right counselors, I think, who are trained to do it. But it's an important concern, and one that you have to make sure you have the right counselors who can do it. Yeah.
Dr. Hoop, I was kind of amazed when you were talking about the group. You had a large population that came in person for these interventions. And when we talk about the low income area, high population, one of the concerns was transportation is always a big concern. And it behooves me that, how did that work out for you guys? Or did you ever ask in the group sessions, how did you get here, or was it any type of barrier you getting here to do in person rather than to do something over the phone that you didn't have to come out?
Good question. So we ask everyone at screening if they have access to transportation by car, by bus, by train. When they're coming in for a face-to-face intervention, we offset the cost of transportation each time they come, but we just give them $5 so they can cover their train or maybe the gas it required to get there. We also, of course, our lab is in this building, so parking is for free for those individuals. But transportation is an issue, and we have had people say, I can't get there. So what we did in our Path to Quit pilot trial was, as you know, we conducted some of the behavioral support sessions at a community location so that people did not have to travel far to get to us. And the other half of people who were in Path to Quit, they came here to this building, and they didn't seem to have much of a problem doing that. But we have had issues. I mean, my staff is committed, and they've gone and met people who can't get back here for their 6-month follow-up at McDonald's, at the library. Wherever they need to go to follow up with them or to engage them, that's what we've done. And that's what we continue to do. We're also looking at other things. We just conducted an analysis for a student's capstone, trying to understand why some people don't show up to our face-to-face intervention. And what we found was that distance was a factor, that people who live, I think it was more than 4.3 miles away from this building, were less likely to come. So we are trying to better understand how we can do that. We've been tinkering with the idea of Uber Health, like what can we do to reduce that barrier. We also deliver counseling on the phone for our end clinic, which is the one side, everybody can come. It's our standard CBT protocol. We deliver that on the phone as well as in person, in individuals and in groups. Yes.
I know you touched base on this earlier on in your presentation, but have you seen any of your, the cultural-based therapy generalized for any other chronic diseases with any research colleagues or things you've done outside of tobacco?
Yes, so there are other programs that are developed. What I struggle with is the findings are so mixed, and I think, so for example, with diabetes, people have developed tailored nutrition programs, for example, and the findings are quite mixed. And that's true even in this tobacco literature. Our programs tend to work, but they're pretty mixed. And I think that might be in part because everyone develops these interventions in a different way. There isn't a standard protocol for how one does this, so it depends on the team and their approach, perhaps the feedback that they've received. But they are developed, but there's not a strong evidence base for them. Yes.
So you did mention that you have a personal relationship with these people you're trying to enroll into this program. And I'm wondering how much that kind of personal relationship might bias the effect that you're looking at. Because if you scale this program up, for example, that kind of personal relationship might not exist because of increase in the people you might be serving. So is there any correlation between the personal relationship that you build with the people you're serving, and that will that affect or bias the effect that you're observing?
Mm-hmm. Okay, good question. So when we I don't think that we have a personal relationship with participants. We recruit them locally, but we don't know them. Like they don't know us. And then we randomly assign them to condition. So in theory, whatever the effect is of them having some form of, like let's say Ms. Byrne goes out and recruits some smokers. She may or may not know them, but when they come in, they don't know our team, and then we randomly assign them to condition. So in theory, that's sort of spread across the condition and wouldn't make a difference on the findings. And then at the Quitline level, yeah, go ahead.
It's not maybe it's not personal relationship, that maybe I'm using the wrong word, but for example, said that you're able to follow them at McDonald's, or, you're able to follow, if they don't show up, you're able to follow them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I'm wondering if that kind of follow-up, which may not exist in the real world, if there's any way of analyzing whether that actually impacts the effect.
Okay, I think I get your question. So in a study, it's a very controlled situation, and the follow-up and the retention rates are critical. So we do what we must do to get our follow-up data. And those are the times in which, if we've had to meet someone at a location nearby them, we would do that for the follow-up data. You wouldn't do that in the real world. And the reason that we do that is because we have to have enough power in our analyses to be able to test the effects of the intervention. When it's scaled up into communities, you naturally lose some of the effectiveness because you're not in a controlled environment, and the efforts to retain people's engagement is not there. But what we want to find is that the intervention works. We want to understand if it works or not. Yeah.
And just a clarifying question, is it you're doing data collection, or you're doing program delivery when you're going to McDonald's, or?
That's just data collection.
Okay, so it's not, you're not really delivering the intervention.
Right, we're not doing counseling in McDonald's. Mm-hmm. We're just going there. If you can't come back in to do your follow-up, where can we meet you to get it done? And we go and we complete the assessment only at that point. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, can you speak a little bit to non-cigarette tobacco products and the extent to which your intervention incorporates addressing those kinds of products?
That's a good question. So in our face-to-face intervention, we do address non-cigarette tobacco products, if you're thinking of e-cigarettes or vapes, for example, because people always ask about it. And so we talk about that. And I will say, I was just talking about this with Jada yesterday, with Pathways to Freedom, I think it does need, the video needs to be updated, because we did not, at the time we filmed it, we did not discuss, we talk about cigars, little cigars, cigarillos, blunts, black and mild. We do talk about that in our video intervention, but e-cigarettes is not a part of it, which I think needs to be updated. But I think I'm glad that we didn't include it then, and the reason that we didn't was a conscious decision because there was not much evidence about it, so we didn't really know what to recommend or say. Now with new evidence emerging, my answer today for what people should do if they want to quit smoking and should they use e-cigarettes is different than it would have been a few years ago. So now I think we're at a place, and even still, we might need just a little bit more evidence before we kind of really finalize our recommendation as it relates to that, but I have a different opinion now than I did then based on the data. But we do talk about the alternative products, but not the e-cigarettes in the video. Yeah.
Did all of the participants use nicotine replacement therapy, or was there a proportion who did or some that didn't?
In all of the studies, because with any quit attempt, it's recommended that people use some kind of FDA-approved aid. So we provide it to everyone. We do assess whether or not they've used it at our follow-ups. I didn't include that, actually haven't even looked at if there were differences in adherence. I don't think I've looked at that yet. But we do look at that. Yes.
With the texting kind of study that you did, do those people receive any kind of written card or something where the words that they need?
The keywords?
That would be hard. If your sample is to 50-year-olds or 50-something, I would have a hard time remembering those three words, any three
The keywords, yeah. Yes, that's a good question. So I think, we do provide them with a handout, because in that study we did see them all in person. So we have it written down what the keywords are. It's also sent in a text message when they first enroll, and then it reminds them of what the keywords are in subsequent text messages. So we do provide it that way to them. And we assessed if people said that they were drawing the keywords. I didn't present it here, but over 84% of people said that they did draw one of the keywords at least one time. But yeah, so we do try to provide it in a way that they'll remember by having it written down.
Because it just seems like that for a younger population, but your population,
it's older.
That want to quit are older.
Yeah.
And I could see that a lot of people that are 50 and 60 years old would have.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's also the thing about digital interventions for tobacco, that most people who are trying to quit are older. Our younger people are the ones we call high risk, because if we see a 30-year-old walk through the door, we're like, that person's going to drop out. And they tend to. But the people who stick around are the people who are 50, 60, and older than that, and who are less, they're just not on the phones to the same degree. So yes, we do want them to remember. Yes.
Given what you said and we know about the digital divide, would you ever consider doing some research around a culturally specific app for, that was different from the text messaging campaign?
Yes, so our next iteration of this is an app that we use the sensor-based intervention. We have developed a mobile app that we are currently testing, and it includes the text messaging, it includes the videos, but it's got more information. People can track how much they're spending on cigarettes, they can track more that way, and it's a mobile application. And what we know is that when we conduct that study, we have to give people the devices. We have to give them the phones with the data plan so they can, and train them on how to use it, because if we had the trouble we had with people understanding how to use the text messaging, it will be amplified when we ask them to use an app, which is more complicated. Yes?
So given some of the feasibility issues you've had with the text message intervention, the pilot study, do you think it would be feasible to do something in a larger scale, where you didn't have that one-on-one to show them how to text and so on?
Well, so that's my concern. I mean, it is happening on a larger scale now. People are testing and developing mobile apps as we speak. So it's happening. My concern, and I think one of the points I'm trying to drive home, is that we have to be careful about this in terms of widening disparities in cessation. If this is the way things are going, if we're moving away from face-to-face approaches for reasonable reasons and making things digital, who are we going to be leaving behind in that process? Because you're right, when someone signs up, if it's complicated, I mean, how many times you try to troubleshoot something on your computer, it's complicated, you're like over it. So, that's a concern that I have, but I think it's important that our research program evolves with the times and tries to figure out how to address these barriers, but they remain major concerns.
Any last questions for Dr. Webb? All right, let's thank her again.